Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here. We're going for a new style today. Over the course of the video I'll be seeing the build in action in a Lost Sector. The only modifiers that are active are Chill, not Chill Cliff, Chill Touch, and Promoted, because I really do enjoy the Promoted one especially. But yeah, those are going to be the things that are active, so y'all are going to be seeing all of that stuff. Now, first things first. First of all, here's I'm gonna show y'all the fashion. By the way, if y'all hear any cuts, because y'all are hearing editing me. But this is the fashion I decided to go with. Do keep in mind, Silver Snare comes from Grasp of Avarice Dungeon. Some of it is from Eververse, but the chest piece from Iron Banner, and the arms are from an old season pass. I think from Season of the Lost, back during the Year of Beyond Light. But I am in the Enclave here, so that I can more so show you all the catalysts or whatever. So this exotic comes with 4 catalysts. The 4th one bugged out, and I am unable to obtain it. So I probably have to go back into the exotic mission, but I kind of don't feel like doing it because there's not really much to the exotic mission. I'm going to be real. Also, Bungie, please make it to where we can see all the options within the exotic, with the crafted weapon equipped. Because right now, you can't do it, unfortunately. But as we go into reshape here, obviously there's going to be Wolfsbane. Now keep in mind, the intrinsic trait, you are going to want all 4 of those, because those increases ammo generation, which the ammo economy is quite nice. Obviously I'm going with Tempered Edge, Jagged Edge. Don't go with the Enduring Blade. You don't need that extra ammo. Just keep the damage. You don't need Enduring Blade. And I'm using Tenacious Handle. But just to keep in mind here, you cannot guard with this exotic, so no, it does not work with strongholds. But the guard resistance stat essentially, well, even though it doesn't show it, increases each handle as you go farther to the right, decreases your damage resist, while the guard endurance, the lower that stat is, the less amount of time it's going to take for you to get that damage resist. So just keep that in mind. Now for the catalyst, we have Attrition Orbs, Relentless Strikes, and Burning Ambition. I do not have access to the 4th one, as I've said before. Here's my thing here. Relentless Strikes is completely useless. Do not use it. This sword has enough ammo as is. If you're using the sword as more of a doing damage sword, and you are not in a fire team of more than 3 people, use Burning Ambition. Keep in mind, though, because keep in mind, I am going to be giving some tips for Warlocks and Hunters as well if you want to use this exotic. But do keep in mind with this exotic, Scorching does not happen until, it's not guaranteed until the 3rd hit. Sometimes it will happen on the 2nd, but usually it would happen on the 3rd hit, which is kind of unfortunate. Well, why am I saying that, only use this in a fire team of 3 or less? And by the way, that's only if there's not that many people using solar, because ignitions do not stack. Ignitions do not stack. So just keep that in mind. Attrition Orbs, in my opinion, is the best one, because you don't have to be hitting the same target over and over. Orb generation is kind of important for this build, especially to keep armor charge stacked, like armor charge is at max. Really, really good for that. I think I like Attrition Orbs the most. However, if those of y'all that have tested out the 4th catalyst, do let me know if y'all like that a little bit more. Now, obviously, for the setup, we are using Attrition Orbs. Now, something to keep in mind here. First and foremost, its exotic is a little rough. I'm not going to lie. Exotic is a little rough. It's just a wee bit rough. Now, I'm going to be skipping a lot of the sort of tests or whatever. I'm more so just going to be spreading it to y'all. So, because y'all can test it out for yourselves. I don't need to see me go through the testing or whatever. But here's some interesting things with the sword. Some melee perks work and some do not. Offensive Bulwark does not increase the sword's damage at all on the light attack. Not at all. Offensive Bulwark does not work. Yada yada. Knockout is a little bit finicky. I'm not completely sure if it gives a damage bonus or anything, but it procs it. but I'm a little bit miffed on why that one seems to work. Uh, rather, when offensive bulwark doesn't do anything, so it might be a little bit finicky on what it counts as. Um, so do not be surprised if some stuff works with it as far as does it count as a powered melee, does it not count as a powered melee, if some things work and some things don't. That being said, it does not count as a melee as far as getting more Roaring Flame stacks goes. Now, an alternative exotic that I was trying out with this build was Phoenix Cradle. I do think if you want to use Burning Ambition on Titan, you should go with Phoenix Cradle to make those sunspots last longer so that they can scorch and so you can get your abilities back so that sunspot lasts a little bit longer. So instead of relying on the sword to start up the scorch, you can rely more on your grenade and melee to start those scorches and then use the axe to do that ignition. That being said, I would not recommend running Roaring Flames with this sword at all. Because of the Roaring Flames, you need your melee slot. You need access to all ability slots to make the absolute maximum usage out of the sword. Now, the exotic I am using for this build is Lordly Splendor. Mostly for the guaranteed sunspot, but also this exotic is quite nice. It doesn't have an enhanced version of restoration or anything, but when you put the barricade down, what is kind of nice here is that you can just stay behind it for the most part and use like a ranged weapon if need be. It's where you can hunker down or whatever. uh, but there's that. Also, Capri's Horn is a really good option with this sword because Capri's Horn is just good as is. That being said, I really wanted to avoid using Capri's Horn for this build. Something I will say, Capri's Horn has gotten a few changes that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. It doesn't proc Roaring Flames. If the solar waves kill enemies, it will not proc Roaring Flames. At least it doesn't show it on the UI. However, if an ignition happens, that will do the Roaring Flames, which, with my particular Capri's Horn build, it guarantees the ignition. So, it basically does, but it doesn't. Now, the stats you want to focus on for this build, for this particular sword, is weapons first. Then I would say class after that, depending on the exotic you are using. Do not get your grenade stat or your melee stat above 70. You don't need it above 70. They don't need to be above 100 is really what I'm saying here. Mostly due to what you have here with my particular setup here, and especially if you have a weapon with blast distributor, you don't need your grenade stat to be that high. We're using our grenade to start the scorch stack, something like that. Our grenade is not meant to kill, so we do not need the damage. Obviously, if you're using Void or anything, that would be a little bit different, but that's besides the point. Especially with our setup, with attrition orbs, you're able to keep a max stack of armor charge basically the entire time, but class is kind of important. However, if you're not using your class ability that often, or not barely building into that, I would recommend going into Super. I would recommend using Super next, and then whatever after that. Now, by the way, you might be asking yourself, well, Hot Sauce Man, why not go full on into Axis and use Void? Void has issues, because offensive bulwark does not work with this. And also, getting a grenade kill to get volatile rounds does not impact the sword at all. The sword does not scorch at all without burning ambition. Does not scorch, cannot ignite. As you'll see in some of the background shenanigans, I'll see that it has no perks whatsoever. In terms of, it doesn't interact with solar. It also doesn't really the reason why I did not use Banner of Void Titan with this either is because Lament really only works with a Banner of Void Titan because that's not your main deal with that setup, really. You're either using 1-2 punch shotgun or something like that, but you're using it for DPS. With this sword, you don't really want to use it for like pure DPS, because you do need to get some enemy kills to build up that Nano Assault. Once you build that up, of course, you can use it as that. But it is kind of an issue that it can't really interact with Strand either. Strand and Void both kind of rely on either using abilities and using weapons that have the same element. Because obviously, Strand empowers strand weapons to get unraveling or spawn threatlings, but it has to be strand weapons. And Void, obviously, you need the grenade to get volatile rounds. Well, Arc doesn't rely on you using Arc weapons as much. Same with Stasis, but relies on abilities melee. That's what a shenanigans. So, getting into the actual set bonus here, we are using the Bushido set for, not for the 2-piece bonus, but for the 4-piece bonus here, being the increased damage resist when using a sword. Because the issue with this build, that y'all will see here, which, by the way, don't mind whatever the fuck I'm doing in the background. But the reason why we're doing this here is this build has really, really strong healing. However, healing doesn't matter if you have no damage resist. Right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The reason why Solar works so well is that the ignitions nuke everything so effectively. That outpaces any sort of damage from the restoration or whatever. But also, you have access to cure. With this build, you're going to have access to restoration and radiant. You are going to have 0 access to cure. Just keep that in mind. Because the only way Titans can really get cure is with Bonk Hammer. I believe that's the only way we can get access to cure is through Bonk. By the way, the nano assaults, they do not, when they heal you, it does not count as you know, radiant, or it does not count as cure or restoration. It doesn't count as anything. It counts as its own separate thing. I think this exotic should have been kinetic. I'm gonna be real. It should have been kinetic. Or strand, because we do not have a strand exotic sword. You do keep in mind, with this build, with attrition orbs, you're building up a lot of orbs, which enhances that weapon stat for this particular build. And by the way, when you do the heavy attack, when you're in the souped up version, you are going to get a sunspot at the target's location. That's the only time it's going to scorch. That's the only time it's going to scorch. So, just keep that in mind here. But that's kind of all of that jazz. Now, by the way, with some of the fragments that I am going to be using in this video, Hunters and Warlocks, you're not going to need a particular fragment that Titans are going to need. Because y'all can get, not Cure, but Radiant. Y'all can get Radiant by just using your class ability. Titans cannot get Radiant outside of the melee fragment. So that is something that will be different if you're a Warlock or Hunter, because Hunters have that Radiant dodge, and Warlocks, I believe Phoenix gives y'all Radiant. But y'all also have like a super that gives y'all Radiant too. So, but Titans have 0 way to get Radiant outside of a fragment. And that's the only way we can get Radiant. There is no other way. Which I do find it interesting that all the other classes get access to, very easy access to Scourge, Ignitions, and Restoration. Meanwhile, Titans really only have easy access to Ignitions, so like Ignition, Scorch, and like that as well. And Cure is only with Bonk. So, but it is what it is. Now, the super we're using for this particular build, is Hammer of Saul. You can use Burning Maul. Obviously, we're using Rally Barricade. By the way, if you're using Burning Maul, use Pyrogales. But do keep in mind, class abilities do have different cooldowns. On Titan, Rally Barricade is faster, so just use that. We're using Bonk Hammer here. You can use Hammer Strike. They both have the same cooldown. However, do keep in mind that this is the only way you'll be able to get Radiant. For anti-barrier, which does make the sword anti-barrier. However, we do have ways of extending that, so that if you prefer Hammer Strike, you can use that instead of Bonk Hammer. I like Bonk Hammer, because also the cure is kind of nice. And we're using Firebolt Grenade instead of Swarm Grenade, mostly due to Swarm is sometimes unreliable, and Firebolt Grenade just has that AoE. It puts in the work. Even though you cannot get Ignition, do not use Healing Grenade. And for our aspects, we're using Consecration and Sol Invictus. Roaring Flames is just way too useless. Consecration is actually really, really solid without Roaring Flames. But also, with Consecration, you do have the extra fragment slot, which makes it really, really worth it. Because, obviously, we're not going to be able to get final kills with solar ability, so it doesn't matter. Now, we're using Ember of Mercy to get that restoration started by picking up Fire Sprite. You do need Ember of Torches if you're a Titan. You do not need this if you're any other character. But it will feed into Ember of Empyrean, and I Obviously, Ember of Tempering is nice because it works with solar weapons, will give us health, but also increased chance to give us a fire sprite. So keep in mind, you can do some stuff with other fragments. We do have two fragments that do feed into each other: Ember of Solace, and then the other one, Ember of Empyrean. Ember of Solace increases the duration of Radiant and Restoration. Does increase the duration of Radiant Restoration by a decent amount, but Ember of Empyrean is nice because it'll increase it. It only increases it by like a couple of seconds, so it's more of like it makes the effect last longer. However, if you can get rapid kills, like it can go all the way up to like 15 seconds for Restoration and Radiant. Do keep in mind when you are looking at your UI, Radiant will disappear very quickly. So if you want to be able to tell whether or not you have Radiant or not, your sword. Look at your sword. That's also why do not have Overload as your artifact. Do not have Overload as your artifact. Or Overload sword. So just keep that in mind here, is you will be able to see Barrier, and obviously, what you're going to see here is we have the damage resist. Damage resist is also going to disappear, so, but don't pay attention to that. But what you're going to be seeing here, Radiant is going to have some insane uptime. By the way, it'll give you Radiant on the uppercut of Consecration. You don't necessarily need to do the slam down, but I like doing the slam down for the other thing. By the way, this is an artifact. When you're Radiant, you have a chance to spawn a little fire thing that'll go off and scorch another enemy, which is quite nice. So do keep that in mind. And obviously, our Radiant timer is insane. But yeah, just make sure you look at the sword. As long as it's anti-barrier, you have Radiant still. When it disappears, you are no longer Radiant. So our Restoration will always be there for the most part, so do just keep that in mind. And then for the weapons we're using, obviously I'm using Festival of Light, not necessary, but for Attrition Orbs. But then SMG, best SMG in the game, with Burning Ambition, Attrition Orbs. I would really love an Arc SMG or an Arc Auto Rifle with Jolting Feedback and Attrition Orbs. Ooh, I would love that so much. I really hope Bungie adds that because I'm really liking this perk combo. That being said, as far as the sword goes, I would have preferred Incandescent over Burning Ambition, but besides the point. Also, there's all my armor mods. I'm not going to go too into detail into them, but y'all can see them for yourselves. And I do have tier 5 arms. I do not recommend using this build, using any build, that are using set bonuses unless you have access to tier 3 armor or higher. The higher the better, obviously, but do not use it if you don't have access to tier 3 armor or higher. Just my personal opinion, because Artifice armor is just better until you have access to tier 3 armor, in my opinion. So, but the bonuses are quite nice for tier 5 armor, so there's that. I'm not going to go too in-depth into the artifact necessarily. I would say instead of running Sniper Damage Resist, I would actually run Concussive Dampener, because AoEs is good. What really kind of kills you with this build, because a lot of bosses that they will have a stomp, or like when they stomp, they will have a fire effect underneath them. And something that I have found that's nuked me more than snipers are enemies throwing AoEs at my feet while I'm doing damage to a beefier target, or a boss stopping and having a fire effect. However, when you have that shit, you're kind of invincible. You do kind of become invincible, so that is something that's interesting. And now that we're back in the Lost Sector, you're going to be kind of seeing how I deal with overloads and barriers. So not necessarily unstoppables, but you can deal with unstoppables with obviously the SMG because it does have Burning Ambition and Ignition stop unstops, but also Consecration. Big reason why I'm using Consecration, because you can, even if, like, especially if you're dealing with multiple unstops, I would suggest trying to force them to be grouped up together. You uppercut, slam down, instant unstop, bada bing, bada boom. You can go back in hand with the sword, or you can use the SMG. You can do a whole bunch of other things. And at that point, if you have your grenade available, wait just a little bit. You can throw out your grenade, get that scorch up, and then swap to the SMG with Burning Ambition. Or if you have Burning Ambition on your sword, I do not recommend going up to an Unstoppable and sorting, especially the Cabal variation. Unstoppables will kind of nuke you, so just keep that in mind here. Now, as far as my thoughts on the Exotic Sword. It's cool. It's pretty cool. However, in my opinion, I think they could have justified it being Strand. And it doing Strand-related things, like instead of a fire tornado, being an unraveling Strand tornado, so that there would have been a little bit more. This would have been like, okay, we finally have a Strand sword to really use with Banner of War. Because that's something that I've kind of been lacking. There are no Strand heavy. There's only one Strand heavy, and that is the rocket launcher. Which, who the fuck is going to use a rocket launcher on Strand type? Fucking no one. You might use an LMG or something. Oh, you will use an LMG over a fucking rocket, at least on Strand type. So I thought this could have been a great opportunity to have a Strand. But to be fair, we have had a lot of Strand exotics so far in Edge of Fate. We obviously have the rocket launcher, and we have the special ammo pulse rifle, the rocket pulse rifle. So it's understandable that this sword's not, whatever. This sword's not Strand. Which is, it's just okay. But it should have scorched on a hit or something. Or at least make it to where the nanites give you restoration or cure. So that there would have been some way to build this into something that's solar related. Because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I think I would have rather this sword have been kinetic even. Over solar. So that, Burning Ambition is quite nice and everything, but I don't know. I think I would have rather the sword have been kinetic, because we only have one other kinetic heavy, being Microcosm, so they just could have worked as in a kinetic heavy. That being said, though, I do think the sword could get a little bit more potent if we got a weapon foundry that had nanites associated with it. Like, I don't know, bring back the Black Armory weapons and give it that origin trait, maybe? Maybe get that origin trait? Because right now it does work with Outbreak Perfected. However, you cannot run both at the same time. And you kind of have to convince another person in your fire team to run Outbreak. Just so that you can run the sword. I'm not a huge fan of exotic pairings like that. I prefer exotic armor and weapon over exotic weapon to exotic weapon pairings. I'm just not a huge fan of it. I think Hierarchy Needs is fine because, let's be real here, there's not an absolute fuck ton of exotic bows. But guess what? You can use it with legendary bows. So, and crossbow, I believe it works with the crossbow. So, there's options there, I would have so I do hope if Bungie releases a foundry at some point that, or like a weapon series at some point that has nanomachines or whatever tied to it that does work with the sword, I do think it can be used with Strand or some other element, as far as, okay, you can passively build up the charges to get those nanomachines passively charge up the sword, and then, so when you whip out the sword, you just hit that reload, which, by the way, I think the reload should be sped up. Because sometimes it takes a little bit long, but it does output a fuck ton of damage. So you can just bada bing, bada boom, treat it as sort of like a mini burst super, which I think that'd be pretty good here. Or you can just treat it like, okay, I have a bunch of enemies grouped up, let's reload, slam down, nuke them. Melee a couple times, slam down, nuke them. By the way, Lucent Blade, you can do the heavy in the charged form. You can do the heavy about 3 times. Meanwhile, with if you don't have it, you can only do it twice. You can only do it twice. So just keep that in mind here. But all in all, Exotic is one of the coolest exotics I think Bungie has released in quite some time. I don't really remember the last exotic that we had that actually changed over time. I don't remember the last one we got that had that. Except like Necrochasm had some little details to it, I guess, but kind of not really. But it just sucks that this exotic's kind of a waste. For me personally, am I going to continue to use Legend of Acrius? Maybe not. Maybe not. Because Khepri's Horn is just too potent. At least until I can consistently get tier 5 armor and whatnot. At that point, I'll probably swap back to my Legend of Acrius setup. Mostly because it is quite strong, and I do love that exotic. However, I am loving Khepri's Horn with Whisper of the Worm. Whisper of the Worm I've actually started to like quite a bit. It's like it's unstop and everything, and it fits very well. I don't know, Whisper of the Worm I'm starting to really enjoy using again, and Khepri's Horn is just so good. It's hard to take me away from it. But anyways, on that note though, the exotic's pretty solid. I think the exotic mission, now that it's been out for a bit, is kind of mid. I don't think it's that bad, but also I don't think it's as good as Presage. Just to keep in mind, which by the way I'm going to go into, so I can see the weapon or whatever. But in my opinion, the exotic mission, like my top 3 exotic missions, is Presage is number 1. Then I would say my number 2. And by the way, Presage was not my first exotic mission. That would be Whisper. The OG Whisper. The OG Whisper. I would put Presage as number 1. I would put Whisper as number 2. Then I would put Harbinger as number 3. Which I know a lot of people haven't done Harbinger. I would say the best of the recent suite of exotic missions is probably Encore in my opinion. I do enjoy that exotic mission as well. Just, by the way, fun fact. Since Harbinger, we have not gotten a single exotic ship to come out with a non-reprised exotic mission. AKA, I'm not counting the new edition of Whisper and Zero Hour. So, and by the way, I'm not as big of a fan of the new rendition of Whisper in Zero Hour as there. I didn't try OG's Zero Hour, but I thought there was some cool stuff with Zero Hour, but I don't know, I wasn't as big of a fan of it. And Whisper, I preferred OG Whisper. I don't know, it was just, I don't know if it's just me, but the lighting was a little bit different back then. I don't know if it's just me or something, but there was something different about Whisper back then that you can't really feel with the rendition of it. Let me know in the comments if y'all kind of understand what I'm saying here. But it's like different. There's a different vibe to it, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. Unless you've played OG Whisper. But, yeah, but I don't think it's anywhere close to, I don't think it's even in the top 5. I do prefer shorter exotic missions. I'm not a huge fan of how long Encore and Revenant is. I do prefer the shorter missions that, you know, you can solo. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I don't know when the new Resident Evil 2 Remake part is going to release, but should release. It'll release sometime around this video being uploaded. I believe I am close to the end, so final episode will be uploaded on the final week of October. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, on that note though, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all on the flip side.